identify the user who's coming. So there has to be some information, something going on there. We have to know something about the person who's coming to authenticate, the user who's on the other side. Otherwise, we can't do anything. Anonymous authentication protocol has two properties. First, it's a general authentication protocol, meaning that the authenticating server knows that the user belongs to a given set of authorized users. Right? So it's sure that only an authorized user is getting in the door, but it's anonymous in the sense the authenticating server has no idea which of those users it is. Okay, that's the way we get around the contradiction. We need to know something, but we only need to know that it belongs to a set of users with a given set of permissions, and then once we know that, then we can allow the user in. We know its permissions, but we don't know which of the users it actually is. As I said, such a protocol has to run on top of an anonymous routing mechanism. We're going to assume that from now on. How do I define security for such a scheme? So first, as I said, it has to be a secure authentication protocol, and this is defined just like any other authentication protocol. No unauthorized user should be able to fool the server into granting it access, except with very small probability. That very small probability is, you can think of it as someone guessing your password or guessing even your secret key for signing on digital signatures. These things can all happen with very small probability. Well, with your password, it depends how well you choose it. But so that's always a risk that can always happen in authentication protocols. It's something that we're not concerned about, because the probability of someone guessing your RSA secret key is so small that we just don't care about it. That's the first requirement, and it has nothing to do with anonymity, but of course it is a requirement. The second one is as follows, and how do we formalize anonymity? This is a bit more tricky. I call this full perfect anonymity. I'll explain why after I give you the definition. Let's talk about the size of the set of users who are being considered. Okay, so we have this can be all of the users who can possibly come into the system, or the users can be divided into different sets depending on their level of permissions. And as we'll see later on, for scalability reasons, we can also divide the users into sets for other reasons, for efficiency reasons. So let L be the size of the set of users being considered. Think of it as 100 or 1,000. We'll say that a protocol provides perfect anonymity if after the authentication takes place, so the server runs the protocol with the user, and now we're assuming that the server itself is the attacker. The server is trying to learn the identity of the user who's coming in. Then after the protocol is run, it can successfully guess the identity of the user with probability 1 over L at the most. Now, if you think about that for a moment, the server can always guess who the user is with probability 1 over L by just giving a random guess. That's always the case. So what I'm saying is the protocol is secure, and that's what's called perfect anonymity. It has nothing to do with breaking some cryptographic primitive, or there's no more a greater probability of success. Basically, the only thing the server can do is just give a random guess. So that's a very, very strong level of anonymity. But sometimes it's actually useful to consider a more relaxed level. Why is that? Because sometimes we can get more efficient, more simple protocols that achieve a lower level of security, and it's something that I call verifiable anonymity. And here, it's possible for the server to cheat. However, if it cheats, then the user will know. So how does this definition work? The user may receive a special cheat message as output. So it runs this protocol, this authentication protocol with the server, and at the end of the protocol, either it gets a message saying, okay, everything's fine, you can continue, or it gets a message saying the server has tried to cheat you. If it gets a message saying the server has tried to cheat you, then obviously it just won't continue, it won't do anything more. It will either log out and, if it's optimistic, if the user is optimistic, try tomorrow or cancel the subscription. But the guarantee is that if the user does not get this cheat message, then once again we're guaranteed that the server's chance of knowing who the user is just 1 over L. So it's sort of, there's two cases. One, the server can actually cheat and know who the user is if it wants to, but then the user will definitely know that fact. Or the server cannot cheat, and then it's reduced to a random guess. Why do I think that this is sufficient? Because when I'm authenticating to some service, then that's the first thing that I do. I haven't done anything yet. All I've done is just try to log in. And if I found out that they know who I am because they've tried to cheat, then I don't have to do anything else. I can automatically stop, log out, and nothing has been learned because I haven't yet done anything. All they know is that I tried to log in on that day. So I probably shouldn't try again 1 second later, but that's about it. Nothing has been lost, and therefore this is a sufficient level of security in most cases. So let's solve the mystery. Is it possible to achieve it, and how? Here's a really naive idea that sounds ridiculous, but it's one step towards the solution. Let's just issue all the users with the same password or the same secret key. Okay? Then obviously, when a user authenticates by presenting its password, the server has no idea who it is because everybody has the same password. Okay, it achieves perfect anonymity, but it's stupid. Why? Because you can't cancel anyone's account, right? If I need to cancel someone's account, then I have to basically I have to reset everybody's password, reset everyone's secret key, and the chances of the key being leaked inadvertently also becomes much, much higher. So this is not what we want. So what do we want? Let's say we have a set of N users, or actually I should have used L users because that was the character beforehand. And I'm going to assume the public key infrastructure. I'm going to assume that the ith user has a key pair, which I denote SKI and PKI. For some public key encryption scheme, think of RSA. RSA is fine. So every user has a digital certificate. For RSA, they have a private key and a public key. And the server has a record linking every user to its public key. That's standard. In practice, obviously, what the server really just does is verify the certificate. It has a list of certificates or has a list of users that are allowed access, and it checks the certificate which binds the user's name to the public key. There's no problem of cancelling a user when we have such an infrastructure. All we need to do is just remove that record, remove that user's names from the list of authorized users. What we are going to assume, and I'll talk about this a little bit later because it's not so trivial or it can be problematic, we're going to assume that the users also know the public keys of the other users. Not just that the server knows who the users are, but also the users themselves. We'll talk about this a bit later. So here's the first attempt at a protocol, and it's surprisingly simple. It's not quite secure yet, but we'll see why, but it gives the flavor of how it can be done. So this seems like a very, very difficult problem, and I'm sort of stretching it out a little bit because the solution is actually surprisingly simple. At least this solution. The user sends a first message, which is just an anonymous request to connect. Okay, I want to log in. What the server does is the following, and we'll have it graphically on the next slide. The server chooses a long random string, encrypts it, and sends it to the user. That's already a standard authentication type idea. The user just has to decrypt it and then send it back. Only someone who knows the secret key can decrypt, so only an authorized user can actually log in. The difference here is that the server doesn't encrypt that long random string under a single user's key. It encrypts it under all the user's keys in that set. And if you're worried about scalability issues already, then hold on because I will deal with that. So it's going to encrypt that random string under all the users in the set and send it to the user. The user can only decrypt one of the ciphertexts because it only knows one key, but that's enough. It decrypts it, gets the message W and sends it back to the server. The server then checks that the person on the other side, the user on the other side, could decrypt and allows them in. Let's look at it graphically. So the user first sends an authentication request. The server chooses a long random string and decrypts it under everyone's public key and sends all of the ciphertexts back to the user. And the user then decrypts the ith ciphertext because that's the key that it knows. It knows one secret key only, and sends it back to the server. And the server accepts if the user could decrypt. So what's the security arguments here? As far as authentication goes, and again, it has to be secure authentication protocol. Without that, we haven't done anything. You can easily see that only one of the users in that set is able to log in, because if you're able to learn the value of W, it means you had to be able to decrypt at least one of those ciphertexts. Okay, so if you want to be able to log in, you have to be able to decrypt one of the ciphertexts. That means you have to know one of the secret keys. That means you have to be one of the legitimate users. Okay, again, if there are any questions, please ask them. If something isn't clear, please ask. So as far as, yes?
You said the server sends the same encrypted message for all of them.
Yeah. So that's exactly why this protocol is only a first attempt. Very good. In the next slide, I'll fix it. The protocol is only a first attempt because the server may cheat, and this is where we get to the anonymity issue. If it's true that the server uses the same random string in all of the ciphertexts, then we're fine, because all of the users will behave in exactly the same way. They'll get the same W. The problem is, and this is your question, that a cheating server may encrypt something different in every ciphertext. As a user, I'm only able to decrypt one ciphertext. I have no idea that the server did that. And if the server did that and I return the long random string that I got, then the server can know exactly who I am. So this is not enough. Again, we want a protocol that guarantees security from my end. All I need is for me to take care that I'm running the protocol correctly and I'm guaranteed that everything will be fine. Okay, I don't need to, I'm not going to trust the server in any way whatsoever. So the solution, and this is where it starts sounding difficult, we'll have a simple solution for this as well, is we want the server to actually prove that it encrypted the same random string in all of the ciphertexts. How do you do that? Well, for those familiar with more advanced cryptographic techniques, you can use things like zero-knowledge proofs. They exist in theory. They exist also in practice. But for this sort of problem, to prove that a set of users, a set of ciphertexts all encrypt the same random string is not going to be very practical. For two strings, if it's two ciphertexts, you could do it. But when you're talking about 100 or 1,000, it's going to be much, much too expensive. So we don't want to do that. Just as a note, really what we want the server to do is to prove to the user that it encrypted the same thing in all the ciphertexts. They can't decrypt because neither the server nor the user knows the other party's secret keys. So we're going to give a proof of encryption and quality, which is very, very simple. And as background, I just want to remind everyone that encryption is actually a probabilistic procedure. Okay? You can't, RSA is not secure if you just take the message and raise it to the power of E mod n. It's not secure in that way. You have to add random padding. So just as one example, if you take PKCS version 1.5 encryption, it works in the following way. You take your message, you add a couple of special bytes, but what's important for what I'm saying here is you add a random block of at least 8 bytes to the left of the message, and then that becomes the block X, which is raised to the power of E mod n. So that's how you do public key encryption. It has to be probabilistic. It has to use some block of random bytes. Otherwise, it just won't be secure. So with that background, let's talk about how it's possible for the server to prove that it encrypted the same value. What it can do is, rather than try to reverse the procedure, just show the user what it did in a forward manner. Okay? I can convince you that I encrypted a certain value without knowing the secret key, without knowing the private key, by just giving you showing you what I did in order to encrypt. Okay, I don't have to, if I'm the person encrypting, then I can always decrypt without knowing the private key by simply showing you how I encrypted. So what I can do is I can give you that random block that I used, give you the message that was encrypted, tell you which public key obviously that I used, and let you just re-encrypt and check what I did. And then you'll be convinced that I actually encrypted that specific message. In more detail,